Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we are going to tackle this question about LLMs, large language models like ChatGPT, and their role in software testing.
Ooh, yeah.
Could they be the future?
It's a question a lot of folks are asking. And luckily, we have some really cool new research to dig into.
Yeah, we do.
Hot off the presses from the Fraunhofer Institute.
We just came out with it this month, too.
Yeah, just this month. And they've actually been putting this into practice.
Wow.
They've been building a system that uses LLMs to automate, a huge chunk of software testing.
Okay, so what are they finding? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, they are finding, I think one of the things that anyone who's worked in software development knows, one of the biggest bottlenecks is just how long it takes to create test cases.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Fraunhofer team, they point out that even for a moderately sized system, like you're just talking 500 requirements,
Right.
it could take over 20 person days just to write the tests.
That's a lot of time.
It's a ton of time.
And money.
It is, absolutely. It's a ton of money. So if we can find a better way to do this, obviously that would be huge.
Huge. So how does this LLM system, how does it actually work?
Well, it's actually pretty elegant and it's pretty straightforward. So you feed the LLM all of the requirements for the software you're building, and these are written just in plain English.
Okay.
Right. And the LLM analyzes those requirements and automatically generates test cases based on that.
Oh, wow.
So it's sort of taking that manual process that engineers would usually do, writing those tests by hand.
Right, yeah.
And it's letting the AI do the heavy lifting.
Okay, so the engineers are freed up to do what then?
Right. So then the engineers can focus on the things that, AI is not quite as good at yet, things like reviewing what the LLM has come up with,
Sure.
refining it, making sure it's really covering all those tricky edge cases that you always worry about.
Now, I read that they actually tested this on a real-world example, like the lane keep assist, the technology you see in cars.
That's exactly right. And this was one thing I thought was really interesting about this research is that they weren't just playing around with this in a theoretical sense. They actually applied it to something that's out there in the real world and really matters, like a safety critical system.
Right. And this is where data security, I think, is a big concern for people.
Absolutely. People are very reluctant to just let their software requirements out into the wild, so to speak.
Right.
And the Fraunhofer team, they were very conscious of that. So they actually used an LLM model that was deployed internally. So none of their sensitive information actually had to leave their secure environment.
So essentially, they found a workaround for that data security problem.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be really important for companies to feel comfortable adopting this kind of technology.
Absolutely. Now, just thinking about the LLMs, you can't just throw any old text at it and expect it to spit out a perfect test case.
Exactly. You need to be very, very careful about how you instruct the LLM, how you guide it, and that's where prompt engineering comes in.
Right.
And in this case, the Fraunhofer team, they used very specific prompts, and these prompts were based on the ISO 26262 standards.
Okay.
And those are, very detailed, very specific standards for functional safety in the automotive industry.
So those prompts are basically telling the LLM, hey, here are the guidelines, stick to these guidelines.
Precisely. And it's kind of like if you were giving someone directions, right? The more clear, the more precise you are, the more likely they are to get to the right destination. And that's what those prompts are doing for the LLM.
Oh, interesting.
They are making sure that it's generating test cases that are actually going to meet the highest industry benchmarks for safety and quality.
That makes sense. Now, okay, so let's say we've fed all this information to the LLM. It spits out a test case. How do we know if that test case is actually any good?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. And the Fraunhofer team, they actually took a two-pronged approach to this.
Okay. So first, they looked at the content of the test, and they were checking, does it cover all the necessary elements, based on industry standards like ISO 26262, ISO 2911, and to measure this, they actually developed these quality of conformance metrics. And it's actually really interesting. If you go and look at the report, they have some visualizations of this.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's really neat to see how they actually quantify this. And then the second prong is the correctness evaluation. And this is all about making sure that the test cases actually work.
Right.
So they did things like comparing the AI-generated test cases to ones that had been written by humans, and they used some really sophisticated comparison techniques to do this.
No, I think it's worth mentioning that even the best LLMs out there, they can still make mistakes.
Oh, absolutely.
You're not perfect.
Not perfect.
So the researchers actually, they didn't just use one LLM, they tested 5 different ones.
Yes. This is a really important point. I think often we talk about LLMs as if they're all the same,
Yeah.
but there are real differences between them.
Oh, right. So they tested Pixtral 12b, Lam A2. They tested two different versions of Lam A3.1 and Gemma.207b. So they really wanted to get a sense of, how do these different models stack up? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
So it's kind of like an AI Olympics for LLMs.
It really was. It's like, who's going to come out on top?
Exactly. And drum roll, please. Who won?
Well, it turns out that LMA 3.1, the 70B version, and Kickstrol were pretty much neck and neck at the top.
Oh, well, so there's no clear winner then.
I think it's more about understanding, okay, if you're going to use an LLM for this purpose, which one is the best fit for your particular needs and your particular situation?
Right, right. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly.
Now, what's next for the Fraunhofer team? What are they working on now?
Well, now they're tackling the challenge of automating the translation of these test cases into a standard format called ASAM Open Test Specification.
Okay, so is that like a universal language that all the testing tools can understand?
Yeah, precisely, because if you want to actually run these tests, you need to be able to feed them into your testing tools, and having them in a standardized format makes that a lot easier.
So that's kind of like their next hurdle. Like once they've got that sorted out, then it's really game on.
It is, because then they can actually start running these LLM-generated tests on a larger scale in real-world settings.
Wow, it feels like we're really on the cusp of a big shift here.
It does, doesn't it? It's a very exciting time to be following this field.
But before we get too carried away, let's just take a step back, take stock of what we've talked about so far.
Sure.
What are some of the things that have stood out to you from this research?
Well, I think for me, what's really exciting about this is that it's not just theoretical, right?
Right.
They're actually showing us concrete examples of how LLMs can automate this process that has traditionally been so time-consuming and so expensive.
Right, and it does beg the question, right? Could this actually make software development faster, cheaper, more reliable?
Exactly, and I think those are the big questions that we need to be asking ourselves as this technology continues to evolve.
But there's also that human element, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can't forget about the people involved in this.
And that's actually something I want to talk about after the break, because, if LLMs are doing more and more of the heavy lifting and testing, what does that mean for the role of the human tester?
That's a great question.
Hold that thought, everybody. We'll be back in just a moment. So before the break, we were talking about the human element in all of this and, how the role of software testers might change as LLMs become more common.
Right, and it's a shift that's, I think, already starting to happen. If you think about it, the skill set needed to guide an LLM to generate a good test case, it's different from what testers have traditionally done.
So it's almost like learning to speak a whole new language.
It is. It's like learning a new language, understanding what the LLM is good at, what it's not so good at, how to design those prompts effectively, how to spot issues with what it generates.
How to kind of refine it.
Exactly. It becomes less about writing those tests by hand and more about understanding these AI tools, managing them.
So it's almost like upskilling to a new level.
Exactly. And it's not just the individual testers either. It's, I think, the whole structure of software development could change.
How so?
Well, imagine a world where testing is no longer this bottleneck that it often is today.
Because the tests are being created so much faster.
Exactly. And that means that development cycles could speed up. You could release new features more quickly, get feedback from users, and make improvements at a much faster pace.
And that would be a huge win for everybody.
Absolutely, for the development teams and for the people using the software. And it could lead to this more iterative, agile way of working.
So instead of these long development cycles,
we're constantly testing, refining as you go, catching issues earlier.
Which is always a good thing.
Absolutely. Anyone who's ever dealt with a software bug knows the earlier you find it, the less it costs to fix.
A stitch in time saves 9, right?
Exactly. And this brings us to, I think, another fascinating point, which is this potential for LLMs to really free up human creativity and innovation.
Because developers are spending less time on that kind of tedious work, like writing basic tests.
Exactly. They can focus their energy on those more complex, interesting problems, the things that AI is not so good at yet.
Coming up with new solutions to new problems.
Exactly. So it's not just about efficiency. It's about opening up new possibilities.
Now, I think whenever we talk about automation, there's always this concern in the back of people's minds about jobs.
Of course, and it's important to have an honest conversation about those concerns, but I think it's helpful to remember that technology rarely eliminates jobs altogether. more often it changes them.
So instead of thinking about LLMs taking over software testing jobs, we should be thinking about how those jobs are going to evolve.
Precisely. And the people who are prepared to adapt, to learn these new skills, and to really embrace this change will be in high demand.
So it's all about upskilling, retraining.
Absolutely. And I think that's a shared responsibility between individuals, companies, and educational institutions to make sure that no one is left behind in this transition.
Now, this Fraunhofer research is incredibly promising, but it's important to remember that LLMs aren't magic.
Right. They're not a silver bullet.
They're tools, and they have their limitations.
You're absolutely right. Even the most advanced LLMs can still make mistakes, and it's crucial to have human oversight in this process. You can't just blindly trust the output of an LLM.
So even in a future where LLMs are commonplace in software testing, we'll still need those skilled humans in the loop, making judgments and ensuring quality.
Absolutely. Human intuition, creativity, that ability to understand complex context, those are all things that LLMs are still a long way from replicating.
It's about finding that sweet spot, leveraging the power of AI, while still retaining that essential human element.
Well said. I think it's important to approach this technology with a balanced perspective, acknowledge both the potential benefits and the potential challenges.
And speaking of challenges, what are some of the big questions that this research raises for you?
Well, one that comes to mind is how do we ensure that LLMs are generating tests that are truly comprehensive, that they're not missing any critical bugs?
Right, because we don't want to create this false sense of security.
Exactly. And that leads to another question, which is how do we know that these tests are reliable and consistent over time? How do we know that they're going to continue to catch those bugs as the software evolves?
So even though these initial results are really encouraging, there's still a lot of research and development that needs to happen.
Absolutely. We're just scratching the surface here, but it's a fascinating area to watch, and I'm excited to see where this technology goes in the next few years.
We'll dive into some of those bigger questions and explore the potential impact of all of this on the software development landscape in our next segment. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show. Thinking about these LLMs and software testing has me thinking about other industries that have gone through kind of big technological shifts. Yeah, it's a great point. Think about the Industrial Revolution. When machines started doing work that was previously done by hand, leading to mass production and, huge increases in efficiency.
It totally changed the way we make things.
It did. It completely changed it. Or think about the rise of computers and the internet.
Yeah.
Completely revolutionized communication and commerce and even the way we think about information.
Absolutely. Right.
And I think just like those revolutions, the rise of AI and LLM specifically is going to bring incredible opportunities, but also some serious challenges.
Yeah, and just like we had to adapt back then.
Yeah.
I think we need to figure out how to adapt to this new landscape with AI.
Absolutely. And one key piece of that is education and training.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Making sure that people have the skills to succeed in this new world where AI is becoming more and more prevalent.
Exactly. So things like data science, machine learning, understanding how these systems work.
Right.
Those are going to be essential skills going forward.
I think it's not just about technical skills either.
Oh, absolutely.
It's things like critical thinking, problem solving, being able to adapt to new situations, because we don't even know what jobs might exist in 5 or 10 years.
Right, exactly. The world is changing so rapidly.
So we need to prepare people to be lifelong learners.
And on that note, I think we also need to keep pushing the boundaries of what we know about these LLMs.
Like there's so much more research that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Figuring out how to make them more reliable, how to ensure that they're not missing those critical bugs, how to, make their decisions more transparent and explainable.
Right, like how do they actually come to these conclusions?
Exactly. All of these are open questions, and it's going to take a real collaborative effort between researchers, developers, policymakers, even the general public.
To make sure this technology is developed responsibly.
Yes, because let's be honest, technology itself isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's all about how we choose to use it.
It's a tool.
It is, and we have a responsibility to make sure that these really powerful AI tools are used to make the world a better place.
So where does that leave us?
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We talked about how LLMs have this potential to really revolutionize software testing, make it faster, more efficient, and potentially even more reliable.
And it's not just about automating those tasks either. It's about rethinking the role of the software tester, the way software is developed, even the skills that people are going to need to thrive in this new world.
And I think perhaps most importantly, recognizing that we have a choice. in how this technology shapes our future.
I completely agree.
We need to be thoughtful about it, proactive, and work together to ensure that AI is a force for good in the world.
Well said. It's a really exciting time to be involved in this field, and I'm optimistic about the possibilities, but that optimism has to be coupled with a healthy dose of caution
Right.
and a real commitment to ethical development.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thank you everyone for joining us for this deep dive into the world of LLMs and the future of software testing.
It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you next time.